Welcome to Sleepy Life Eras. Tonight, we are inside a quiet medieval kitchen. Nothing here needs your attention. The work of the day has already finished. Nothing is going to happen next. There is no story to follow. This video is safe to leave playing as you rest. You may listen or simply allow the sound and stillness to remain in the background. The night has already begun. The medieval kitchen is quiet now, with all work already completed. The stone hearth sits cold, holding only settled ash and darkened stone. No fire remains, and no warmth moves through the room. Iron cookware hangs above the hearth, perfectly still and unused. The air is clear, without smoke, steam, or lingering heat. A wooden work table stands nearby, its surface wiped and left bare. Faint knife marks remain in the grain, unchanged and familiar. A single bread knife rests where it was placed earlier. Its blade faces inward, no longer part of any task. Clay bowls and earthenware cups sit empty on a shelf. They are stacked loosely, untouched since the evening ended. A closed sack of grain leans against the stone wall. The cord at its opening is tied and left undisturbed. A rough wooden bench has been pushed back beneath the table. It waits unused, aligned neatly with the room around it. Utensils hang from wall pegs in quiet vertical lines. Ladles and hooks remain where they were last returned. The shuttered window shows only darkness beyond the glass. No light enters, and nothing outside calls attention inward. Ash dust rests lightly across the stone floor near the hearth. The texture of the floor remains unchanged and unmarked. A single candle burns low on a wooden shelf. Its flame is steady, offering light without movement. Shadows remain soft and settled along the walls. The thick wooden door is closed, with the bar set firmly. Nothing enters, and nothing leaves this space now. The kitchen remains finished, enclosed, and complete for the night. The room holds its shape without effort, defined by stone, wood, and air. The kitchen no longer presents itself as a place of work. It exists only as a settled interior, unchanged and sufficient. Stone walls remain where they are, thick and unmoving. Their surfaces hold the memory of heat without releasing it. The hearth is present as mass rather than purpose. Ash rests where it fell, no longer part of anything else. Darkened stone absorbs light instead of reflecting it. Above it, iron hangs in place, defined by weight and silence. Metal does not move or respond. It simply remains suspended, balanced, and complete. Wooden surfaces hold their grain quietly. The table no longer suggests use or preparation. It is only a flat plane within the room. Marks in the wood exist without meaning. Edges soften as attention drifts away from detail. Objects lose their individual roles and become part of the space. A blade rests as shape rather than tool. Clay forms sit as simple volumes, empty and still. Nothing asks to be handled or adjusted. The room holds itself without expectation. Surfaces meet at quiet angles. Lines remain straight and patient. Nothing leans toward change. Nothing suggests continuation. Air rests evenly between walls and objects. There is no trace of movement within it. The temperature feels neutral without direction. Warmth and cold lose distinction here. The space settles into balance. Shadows remain where they formed earlier. They do not lengthen or shift. Light exists only to define edges softly. Brightness fades into dimness without contrast. The candle's presence is reduced to a steady point. Its glow does not demand attention. It simply marks that the room is enclosed and intact. Beyond the window, darkness holds no features. The exterior is only absence. Inside and outside remain clearly separated. Boundaries stay firm and reliable. The floor supports everything evenly. Stone beneath absorbs weight without response. Dust and ash remain exactly where they settled. Texture becomes more noticeable than shape. Roughness and smoothness replace names and functions. The bench aligns with the table without purpose. Furniture becomes geometry within the room. Vertical and horizontal lines repeat quietly. Utensils on the wall dissolve into simple silhouettes. Their outlines blur gently into the background. Metal, wood, and clay share the same stillness. Material differences matter less now. The door remains closed as a concept rather than an object. It represents separation without action. Nothing approaches it. Nothing waits behind it. The kitchen holds a completed feeling. Not finished in a moment, but finished entirely. There is no sense of before or after here. Time rests alongside the walls and floor. Minutes and hours lose distinction. The room does not measure them. Attention becomes less focused on any single place. The space is taken in as a whole. Edges soften further. Distances feel shorter and less defined. The kitchen becomes a single quiet volume. Weight distributes evenly across the room. Nothing presses or pulls. The air remains calm and unchanged. Sound has already settled into silence. The space holds no questions. It offers no direction. It remains steady, neutral, and sufficient. The stone hearth remains where it has always been, quiet and unchanged. Its surface holds the marks of earlier use without responding to them. No fire remains within it now. The space where flame once existed is empty and still. Stone forms the hearth's shape with steady weight. Each block rests against the next without movement. The stones do not shift or settle further. They have already found their position. Ash lies thinly across the base of the hearth. It has finished falling and does not lift again. Nothing disturbs its surface. The ash remains exactly as it is. The hearth does not give off heat. It no longer holds warmth or releases it. Temperature around it feels neutral and even. Warm and cool no longer separate here. Darkened stone absorbs light softly. Edges appear dull rather than sharp. Shadows gather without depth or contrast. Nothing within the hearth draws the eye forward. The interior of the hearth is empty space framed by stone. That space remains open but inactive. It does not invite use or attention. It simply exists as a hollow that has finished its purpose. Stone surfaces feel dense and reliable. They do not echo or respond. Weight is held without effort. Nothing presses outward from within. The hearth sits low and grounded against the floor. Its base connects firmly to the stone beneath it. There is no separation between one surface and the next. Everything rests together without distinction. The absence of flame leaves no gap. The space feels complete without it. Nothing is missing from the hearth now. It has already returned to rest. Ash appears as texture rather than substance. Its fine layer softens the stone below. The surface shows no pattern or movement. It remains uniform and quiet. Light settles gently across the hearth's face. There is no reflection, only muted presence. Brightness fades before it reaches the deepest stone. Darkness remains contained and still. The hearth does not signal warmth or gathering. It no longer serves as a center for activity. It exists only as structure within the room, a form that has finished being needed. Stone meets air at quiet boundaries. Those boundaries do not shift. Nothing moves across the hearth surface. Nothing falls or rises within it. The interior space remains empty and calm. It does not wait for anything to return. It does not hold expectation. It remains settled in its current state. The hearth's presence becomes less specific over time. Its edges soften in awareness. Stone blends into shadow without contrast. Form becomes less defined than weight. Attention drifts across the hearth without stopping. No single detail stands out. The surface reads as a single quiet plane. Texture replaces detail gradually. Ash and stone share the same stillness. Their difference becomes less noticeable. Material identity fades into neutrality. Only presence remains. The hearth holds silence without effort. It does not produce sound or absorb it. Silence rests evenly across its surface. Nothing breaks that balance. The hearth does not suggest time passing. It does not change as moments continue. Past and present hold the same shape here. The hearth remains outside of sequence. Stone blocks align without intention. Their arrangement feels final and complete. Nothing needs to be adjusted or improved. The structure rests exactly as it should. The cold hearth becomes part of the room's overall mass. It no longer stands apart from surrounding space. It blends into the stillness around it. The boundary between object and room softens. The hearth remains quiet, grounded, and unchanged. It holds no task, no purpose, and no movement. It simply remains where it is. Finished, neutral, and at rest. The iron pot hangs in place above the hearth, unmoving and complete. Its weight is fully supported and no longer in question. The hook that holds it does not strain or shift. Everything involved in its suspension has already settled. The pot does not sway or respond to the air around it. It remains perfectly still within the space it occupies. There is no motion waiting to begin. Stillness has already been achieved. The iron surface appears dark and matte. Light touches it softly without reflection. No shine or brightness draws attention outward. The surface absorbs light instead of returning it. The pot holds its rounded shape without emphasis. Its curve does not suggest use or purpose. It is simply a contained volume of metal, defined by weight rather than function. The opening of the pot faces downward into empty space. Nothing rests inside it now. The interior holds only quiet darkness, That darkness remains unchanged and inactive. Iron feels dense and reliable in its presence. It does not respond to temperature or sound. The metal exists without reaction. It remains steady within the room's balance. The chain above the pot holds firm without tension. Links remain aligned exactly as they are. No link shifts or adjusts its position. The connection feels final and complete. The pot hangs at a fixed distance from the hearth below. That distance does not change or narrow. Nothing rises to meet it. Nothing lowers to disturb it. The absence of heat leaves the iron unchanged. It does not warm or cool further. Temperature loses relevance around it. The pot exists outside of sensation. Edges soften as attention rests on its outline. The pot's form becomes familiar and unremarkable. No detail demands closer inspection. The shape reads as whole and sufficient. The iron pot does not indicate time passing. It looks the same moment after moment. There is no change to track or expect. Time settles around it without effect. The pot does not belong to any action now. It has finished being needed. Its presence no longer suggests activity. It remains as a quiet remnant of completion. Sound does not collect around the iron surface. No echo forms within its hollow shape. Silence rests evenly across it. Nothing interrupts that silence. The pot's position in space feels resolved. It is neither too high nor too low. It occupies a place that does not need adjustment. Balance has already been achieved. Metal and air meet without friction. That boundary remains calm and unchanged. Nothing passes between them. The separation holds without effort. Attention drifts across the pot's surface slowly. No single area stands apart from another. The form reads as one continuous presence, uniform and steady. The pot does not attract thought or interpretation. It offers no message or signal. It simply remains where it is, unchanged and neutral. The iron surface blends into surrounding shadow. Contrast fades as awareness softens. Edges become less distinct over time. Only general shape remains. The pot's weight feels evenly distributed. Nothing pulls it forward or back. Gravity has already done its work. Everything rests where it should. The hanging pot becomes part of the room's overall stillness. It no longer stands out as an object. It blends into the quiet structure of the space. Object and environment soften together. The iron pot remains motionless, dark, and complete. It holds no task, no warmth, and no movement. It simply stays suspended in place. Finished, balanced, and at rest. The wooden work table stands quietly within the room, unchanged and complete. Its surface remains flat and steady beneath the dim light. No work remains upon it now. The table has already finished its role for the day. The wood holds its shape without strain or movement. Planks rest together, aligned and settled. Nothing shifts along their edges. Everything remains exactly as it was left. The surface appears clean and bare. No tools or materials remain in use. The table does not invite attention or action. It simply occupies its place within the room. Grain lines run quietly along the wood. They follow familiar paths without interruption. No pattern asks to be traced or followed. The markings exist without meaning now. Edges of the table remain firm and stable. Corners do not catch or pull awareness outward. Their angles are softened by stillness. Nothing about them suggests motion or change. The table's weight presses evenly into the floor beneath it. That weight is fully supported and resolved. No adjustment is needed. The table rests without effort. The surface holds faint traces of earlier contact. Shallow marks remain in the wood. They do not deepen or fade further. They simply remain as quiet texture. Light falls gently across the table's surface. It reveals shape without highlighting detail. Brightness does not linger or move. Shadows stay soft and contained. The table does not signal preparation or completion now. It exists beyond sequence or task. Past and present feel the same here. The table holds no timeline. Wood fibers remain dense and quiet. They do not creak or respond. The material holds itself together without sound. Stillness settles evenly across it. The table's legs remain firmly planted. They stand without tension or movement. No vibration passes through them. Support remains constant and complete. Attention drifts across the table without stopping. No area stands apart from another. The surface reads as one continuous plane, uniform and calm. The table does not carry warmth or cold distinctly. Temperature loses relevance against its surface. Sensation becomes neutral and balanced. Nothing presses against awareness. The table does not suggest use returning. It does not wait for hands or tools. Expectation has already left this space. Only presence remains. Edges soften further as attention loosens. Definition gives way to general shape. The table becomes part of the room's volume, not separate, but included. Wood blends into surrounding shadow. Contrast fades without effort. The surface becomes less distinct than the space around it. Form yields to quiet mass. The table does not interrupt silence. Sound does not collect along its edges. Stillness remains unbroken. Nothing changes within it. The table's presence grows simpler over time. Meaning falls away from its shape. It is no longer a place for action. It is simply part of the room. Weight and balance remain evenly distributed. Nothing pulls forward or recedes. The table rests within the same calm state, unmoved and sufficient. The surface no longer reads as a boundary. It becomes a continuation of the surrounding stillness. Edges blur gently into space. Separation feels unnecessary here. Awareness no longer settles on the table directly. It passes over it without pause. The object does not hold attention. It allows attention to rest elsewhere. The table feels complete without description. Nothing about it requires naming. Its presence is understood without focus. It exists quietly within the whole. The wooden work table becomes indistinct within the kitchen's stillness. It no longer stands out as an object. It blends into the quiet structure around it. Object and space soften together. The table remains settled, neutral, and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains where it is. Finished, steady, and at rest. The bread knife rests where it was placed, unmoving and complete. Its position does not suggest further use or adjustment. The blade lies still against the surface beneath it. Nothing presses against its edge. Metal and air meet without friction. The knife does not reflect light sharply. Its surface appears dull and quiet. Brightness fades softly along its length. The blade's edge faces away without intention. It does not point toward anything. Direction no longer matters here. The knife exists without orientation. The handle remains still and balanced. Its shape fits naturally into the space around it. No grip is implied or expected. The form rests without readiness. The knife carries no motion within it now. Its weight is fully supported and resolved. Nothing pulls it forward or back. Everything about it feels settled. The metal holds a neutral temperature. Warmth and coolness lose distinction along its surface. Sensation does not linger here. The object remains neutral to touch and thought. Light touches the blade gently without emphasis. No highlight draws attention to any part of it. Edges soften as awareness relaxes. The knife reads as a simple line in space. The blade no longer suggests function or purpose. It has finished being needed. Use has already left the object. Only presence remains. The knife does not signal time passing. It appears the same moment after moment. No change occurs along its length. Time rests evenly around it. Sound does not gather near the blade. No vibration travels through the metal. Silence remains unbroken along its edge. Nothing interrupts that quiet. The knife's surface absorbs stillness rather than reflecting it. Contrast fades as attention softens. Metal blends gently into surrounding shadow. Definition becomes less important than weight. The object rests without expectation. It does not anticipate being lifted or moved. The knife does not wait for anything. Completion has already arrived. Awareness drifts across the blade without stopping. No detail asks to be examined closely. The knife reads as a single quiet form. Uniform and calm. The boundary between handle and blade loses emphasis. Parts feel less distinct from one another. The object becomes one continuous presence. Shape replaces function entirely. The knife does not interrupt the room's balance. It fits easily into the surrounding stillness. Nothing about it stands apart. It belongs fully to the quiet space. Edges soften further as attention loosens. Sharpness fades into general form. The blade becomes less defined over time. Only length and presence remain. The knife does not call for removal or storage. It has already been set aside. Placement feels final and complete. Nothing more is required. The object holds no urgency. It carries no signal or warning. The knife rests without meaning attached. Neutral and sufficient. The blade no longer separates space. It becomes part of the surface it rests upon. Boundaries soften without effort. Separation feels unnecessary here. Attention passes over the knife more slowly now. Recognition fades into familiarity. The object no longer registers as distinct. It blends quietly into the room. Metal and stillness share the same quality. Difference loses relevance over time. The knife becomes simply another quiet presence, contained within the space. The bread knife remains where it is, settled and unchanged. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains set aside, finished, neutral, and at rest. The clay bowl rests quietly where it was placed, unchanged and complete. Its rounded form holds stillness without effort. The bowl does not contain anything now. Its interior remains empty and calm. The surface of the clay appears matte and even. Light settles across it without reflection. No shine draws attention outward. The form remains soft and muted. The bowl's weight is fully supported beneath it. Nothing shifts or presses unevenly. Balance has already been achieved. The object rests without adjustment. Nearby, earthenware cups remain grouped together. Their shapes repeat quietly without variation. Each cup holds the same calm presence. No distinction stands out among them. The cups are empty and still. Nothing fills their interiors. They hold only quiet space. That space remains unchanged. Clay surfaces feel dense and grounded. They do not respond to sound or movement. The material holds its form without reaction. Stillness settles evenly across each piece. Edges of the bowl appear smooth and softened. The rim does not catch the light sharply. Its curve reads as continuous and gentle. Nothing interrupts its line. The cups mirror this same quiet geometry. Rounded sides repeat familiar shapes. Their forms feel known and unremarkable. Comfortably consistent. The clay does not suggest use returning. These objects have finished their role. Expectation no longer rests within them. They exist beyond sequence or task. Light touches the bowl and cups gently. Brightness fades before becoming distinct. Shadows remain soft and contained. Contrast does not sharpen any edge. The bowl's interior reads as a quiet hollow. Depth feels shallow and calm. Nothing settles inside it. Nothing leaves it either. The cups hold similar empty volumes. Each interior remains open and inactive. Space rests gently within their walls, unoccupied and still. The objects do not indicate time passing. They appear the same moment after moment. No mark changes or shifts. Time settles around them without effect. Sound does not gather near the clay. No echo forms within the bowl or cups. Silence remains even and complete. Nothing interrupts it. Attention drifts across their surfaces slowly. No detail asks to be examined closely. The forms read as simple volumes, uniform and calm. Material differences fade in importance. Bowl and cups share the same stillness. Clay becomes presence rather than substance. Form replaces function entirely. Edges soften further as awareness relaxes. Definition gives way to general shape. The objects blend into surrounding space. Not separate, but included. The bowl no longer stands apart from the surface beneath it. The cups lose distinction between one another. Boundaries blur gently. Separation feels unnecessary here. The clay holds no warmth or coolness distinctly. Temperature loses relevance along its surface. Sensation becomes neutral and balanced. Nothing presses against awareness. The objects do not interrupt the room's balance. They fit easily into the surrounding stillness. Nothing about them draws focus. They allow attention to rest elsewhere. Awareness passes over the bowl and cups more slowly now. Recognition fades into familiarity. The objects no longer register as distinct. They blend quietly into the environment. Clay and silence share the same quality. Difference loses relevance over time. Only quiet presence remains. Contained within the space, the bowl feels less like an object and more like a curve within the room. Its outline softens as awareness loosens. The cups follow the same quiet path. Shape dissolves into general volume. Edges no longer signal separation. They simply mark where space gently turns inward. Interior and exterior lose contrast. Only enclosed calm remains. The bowl and cups remain where they are, settled and unchanged. They hold no task, no motion, and no expectation. They simply remain empty and still. Finished, neutral, and at rest. The sack of grain rests quietly against the stone wall, unchanged and complete. Its shape holds without shifting or settling further. The fabric gathers naturally around its contents. Nothing presses outward from within. The sack is closed at the top, tied and left as it is. The cord does not loosen or tighten. Closure feels final and resolved. Nothing more is required. The sack leans gently without strain. Its weight is fully supported by the floor beneath it. Balance has already been achieved. The object rests without effort. The surface of the sack appears rough and matte. Light touches the fabric softly without reflection. No highlight draws attention to any single fold. Texture remains even and quiet. The contents inside the sack do not move. They remain compact and contained. Nothing shifts or settles further within. Everything has already found its place. The sack does not suggest opening or use. It has finished its role for the day. Expectation no longer rests within it. It exists beyond sequence or task. The fabric holds gentle creases where it folded earlier. Those creases remain unchanged. They do not deepen or relax further. The surface remains as it was left. The sack's outline feels soft rather than rigid. Edges round naturally into the space around them. No sharp line interrupts its form. Everything appears settled and complete. The sack does not signal time passing. It appears the same moment after moment. No change occurs along its surface. Time rests evenly around it. Sound does not gather near the fabric. No rustle or shift is present. Silence remains unbroken along its folds. Nothing interrupts that quiet. The sack's weight presses gently downward. That pressure remains constant and resolved. Nothing lifts or compresses further. Support feels complete. The fabric absorbs attention rather than reflecting it. Focus does not linger on any one fold. Awareness passes over the surface slowly. Nothing holds it in place. The sack does not interrupt the room's balance. It fits naturally into the stillness around it. Nothing about it stands apart. It belongs fully to the quiet space. The closure at the top remains undisturbed. The knot holds without tension. Nothing pulls against it. The tie exists only as a sign of completion. The sack does not suggest fullness or emptiness. Its contents are not measured or considered. Meaning does not gather here. Only contained presence remains. Attention drifts across the sack more slowly now. Recognition fades into familiarity. The object no longer registers as distinct. It blends quietly into the background. The fabric becomes part of the room's texture. Material difference loses importance. Surface blends into surrounding shadow. Distinction continues to soften. The sack no longer reads as an object alone. It feels like a gentle mass within the room. Shape dissolves into general volume. Edges blur without effort. The sack does not invite thought or interpretation. It offers no signal or message. It simply remains where it is, quiet and unchanged. Awareness widens beyond the sack itself. The object no longer anchors attention. It allows focus to drift gently onward, without resistance. The fabric holds silence without effort. It neither produces nor resists sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around it. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The sack remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. The sack of grain rests quietly where it is, settled and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains closed and still. Finished, contained, and at rest. The wooden bench rests quietly beneath the table, pushed in and left as it is. Its position feels resolved and complete. The bench does not extend into the room. It remains aligned with the space around it. The wood holds its shape without strain. Planks sit together firmly and evenly. Nothing shifts along their length. Everything has already settled. The surface of the bench appears worn and familiar. Marks in the wood remain unchanged. They do not deepen or fade further. Texture stays consistent and quiet. The bench does not suggest use returning. It has finished its role for the day. No expectation rests upon it now. It exists beyond sequence or task. The bench's weight presses evenly into the floor beneath it. That weight is fully supported and resolved. No adjustment is needed. Support remains constant. The legs of the bench stand firmly and still. They do not flex or respond. No vibration passes through them. Stability remains complete. Light touches the bench softly without emphasis. Brightness does not highlight any single area. Shadows remain even and contained. Contrast stays low and gentle. The bench does not interrupt the room's balance. It fits naturally into the space beneath the table. Nothing about it draws attention outward. It allows the room to remain calm. Edges of the bench appear softened by stillness. Corners do not pull awareness toward them. The outline reads as familiar and unremarkable. Shape feels settled and sufficient. The bench does not indicate time passing. It appears the same moment after moment. No change occurs along its surface. Time rests quietly around it. Sound does not gather near the wood. No creak or shift is present. Silence remains unbroken. Nothing interrupts that quiet. Attention drifts across the bench slowly. No detail asks to be examined closely. The surface reads as a simple plane, uniform and calm. The bench does not carry warmth or cold distinctly. Temperature loses relevance against its surface. Sensation becomes neutral and balanced. Nothing presses against awareness. The bench's position beneath the table feels intentional but finished. Alignment remains unchanged. Nothing slides or shifts out of place. Everything remains as it was left. Edges soften further as attention loosens. Definition gives way to general shape. The bench becomes part of the room's volume. Not separate, but included. Wood blends into surrounding shadow without contrast. Surface detail becomes less distinct. Form yields to quiet mass. Distinction continues to fade. The bench does not signal presence or absence. It does not imply return or departure. Meaning does not gather here. Only structure remains. Awareness passes over the bench more slowly now. Recognition fades into familiarity. The object no longer registers as distinct. It blends quietly into the background. The bench becomes less an object and more a line within the room. Its outline softens as awareness loosens. Shape dissolves into alignment. Presence becomes structural rather than specific. The bench does not anchor attention. It allows focus to drift gently onward. Nothing holds awareness in place. Drift feels natural and unforced. The wood holds silence without effort. It neither produces nor resists sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around it. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The bench remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. The wooden bench rests quietly beneath the table, settled and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. it simply remains pushed in and still. Finished, aligned, and at rest. The wall pegs hold their utensils in quiet vertical lines, unchanged and complete. Each peg supports its weight without strain. Nothing pulls downward beyond what is already settled. Balance has been reached and remains stable. The utensils hang motionless against the wall. They do not sway or respond to the air. Stillness is already present. Nothing needs to settle further. Metal surfaces appear dark and matte. Light touches them gently without reflection. No shine draws attention outward. The forms remain muted and calm. Each utensil occupies its own space. Spacing between them remains even and consistent. No piece overlaps another. Order feels natural and resolved. The wall behind them remains still and supportive. It does not shift or respond. The pegs hold firmly where they were placed. Nothing loosens or tightens further. The utensils do not suggest use returning. They have finished their role for the day. Expectation no longer rests upon them. They exist beyond sequence or task. Vertical lines repeat quietly along the wall. Height and spacing remain consistent. The pattern does not change. Repetition feels calm and reliable. Edges of metal appear softened by stillness. Corners do not pull attention toward them. Outlines read as familiar and unremarkable. Shape feels settled and sufficient. The utensils do not interrupt the room's balance. They fit naturally into the vertical surface of the wall. Nothing about them draws focus outward. They allow the room to remain quiet. Light fades gently as it reaches the wall. Brightness does not linger on any one piece. Shadows remain thin and contained. Contrast stays low and even. The utensils do not indicate time passing. They appear the same moment after moment. No shift or movement occurs. Time rests quietly around them. Sound does not gather near the hanging metal. No clink or echo is present. Silence remains unbroken. Nothing interrupts that quiet. Attention drifts upward and downward along the hanging lines. No single utensil stands apart. The grouping reads as one quiet arrangement, uniform and calm. Material differences lose importance over time. Metal and wall share the same stillness. Substance becomes presence rather than function. Form replaces purpose entirely. The pegs remain fixed in the wall. They do not bend or respond. Support feels complete and unquestioned. Nothing presses against them further. The utensils hang at consistent distances from the wall. They do not touch or collide. Spacing remains unchanged. Separation feels sufficient and resolved. Edges soften further as awareness loosens. Definition gives way to general outline. Individual shapes blur gently together. The pattern becomes more noticeable than any object. Vertical repetition begins to feel structural rather than specific. Lines replace tools in awareness. The wall reads as a quiet field with gentle markers. Nothing asks to be named. The utensils do not anchor attention. They allow awareness to move freely along the wall. Focus does not linger or settle. Drift feels natural and unforced. Metal surfaces blend into surrounding shadow. Contrast continues to fade. The difference between object and wall softens. Separation becomes less distinct. The hanging arrangement feels less like tools and more like quiet lines. Presence replaces identity. Meaning does not gather here. Only structure remains. Awareness widens beyond the wall pegs themselves. The arrangement no longer holds focus. It becomes part of the room's overall stillness, included rather than separate. The utensils and pegs hold silence without effort. They neither produce nor resist sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around them. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The wall and its hanging lines remain unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. The wall pegs and hanging utensils remain where they are, settled and complete. They hold no task, no motion, and no expectation. They simply remain hanging and still, finished, aligned, and at rest. The shuttered window rests quietly within the wall, closed and unchanged. Its position feels settled and complete. The shutters remain firmly in place. Nothing presses against them from either side. The wood of the shutters appears dark and matte. Light does not pass through their surface. The opening behind them remains fully covered. Nothing enters through this boundary now. The frame holds the shutters without strain. Edges align evenly within the stone around them. No gap remains uncovered. Enclosure feels complete. The shutters do not suggest opening or movement. They have finished their role for the day. Expectation no longer rests upon them. They exist beyond sequence or task. The surface of the shutters absorbs the dim light inside the room. Brightness fades before reaching the edges. No reflection draws attention outward. The surface remains quiet and uniform. The window no longer functions as a view. It exists only as a closed plane within the wall. Inside and outside remain clearly separated. Nothing crosses this line. Sound does not pass through the shutters. No noise gathers near the frame. Silence remains even and contained. Nothing interrupts it. The shutters do not indicate time passing. They appear the same moment after moment. No shift or change occurs along their surface. Time rests quietly against them. Attention drifts toward the window without settling on detail. No grain or mark stands out. The surface reads as one quiet plane, uniform and calm. The boundary the shutters create feels reliable. It does not waver or thin. Inside remains inside. Outside remains absent. The shutters do not suggest distance or depth. They flatten space gently. The exterior becomes only the idea of elsewhere. Nothing more forms beyond it. The window holds darkness without detail. No shapes or movement appear beyond the wood. Absence feels complete and quiet. Nothing presses inward from beyond. The shutters feel thick and sufficient. They block light without effort. Nothing leaks through their seams. Separation remains intact. Edges soften as awareness relaxes. Definition gives way to general boundary. The window becomes less an object and more a limit. A quiet stopping point. The frame around the shutters holds steady. Stone and wood meet without tension. The junction remains unchanged. Everything stays in place. The shutters do not interrupt the room's balance. They complete the wall rather than opening it. Nothing draws awareness beyond them. Attention remains within the room. Light inside the kitchen remains low and even. The shutters absorb rather than reflect it. Contrast continues to soften. Edges fade gently into shadow. The window does not invite thought or interpretation. It offers no scene or suggestion. Meaning does not gather here. Only enclosure remains. Awareness begins to rest less on the shutters themselves. They no longer anchor attention. The boundary becomes part of the room's quiet mass, included rather than separate. The difference between wall and window softens. Both feel like continuous surface. Distinction fades without effort. Space feels contained and sufficient. The shutters hold silence without effort. They neither produce nor resist sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around them. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The window remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. The shuttered window remains closed, settled, and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains as a quiet boundary. Finished, enclosed, and at rest. The stone floor rests quietly beneath the room, unchanged and complete. Its surface holds steady without movement or shift. Each stone lies where it has always been. Nothing presses it to change. Ash dust rests lightly across portions of the floor. It has already settled and does not lift again. No pattern forms within it. The dust remains evenly dispersed. The stones beneath feel solid and unmoving. Their weight presses downward into the ground below. Support feels complete and unquestioned. Nothing shifts under that weight. The surface of the stone appears worn and familiar. Subtle variations remain visible without emphasis. No single mark draws attention outward. Texture remains calm and even. Ash dust softens the stone surface gently. It dulls edges without hiding them. Contrast remains low and quiet. Nothing sharpens or stands apart. The floor does not suggest movement or passage. It exists only as support within the room. Nothing crosses it now. Stillness remains complete. Light touches the floor without direction. Brightness fades before forming highlights. Shadows remain thin and settled. The surface absorbs light quietly. The stones do not indicate time passing. They appear the same moment after moment. No change occurs across their surface. Time rests evenly here. Sound does not gather near the floor. No echo or vibration is present. Silence remains unbroken. Nothing interrupts it. The floor does not invite attention upward. It allows awareness to settle downward gently. Nothing pulls focus away from stillness. Rest feels natural here. Ash dust remains where it fell earlier. No breeze or movement disturbs it. Its fine texture remains unchanged. Everything has already settled. The boundary between stone and dust softens over time. They begin to feel like one surface. Difference becomes less important. Only quiet texture remains. Edges of individual stones lose definition. Lines blur gently into one another. The floor reads as a single plane, uniform and calm. The stones do not carry warmth or cold distinctly. Temperature loses relevance here. Sensation becomes neutral and balanced. Nothing presses against awareness. The floor does not interrupt the room's balance. It supports everything evenly and quietly. Nothing leans or shifts upon it. Support remains constant. Attention drifts slowly across the surface of the floor. No area stands apart from another. Texture repeats gently, without variation. Familiar and steady. Ash dust feels less like substance and more like softness. It mutes the surface without altering it. Presence replaces detail. Nothing asks to be examined closely. The floor does not suggest direction or distance. It remains flat and sufficient. There is no path to follow. Nothing leads elsewhere. The stone absorbs attention rather than reflecting it. Focus does not linger on any point. Awareness passes over the surface naturally, without pause or effort. The difference between floor and room softens gradually. Ground becomes part of overall space. Separation feels unnecessary. Everything feels contained. The floor holds silence without effort. It neither produces nor resists sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The floor remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. Awareness begins to rest less on the surface itself. The floor no longer anchors attention. It becomes part of the room's quiet mass, included rather than separate. The ash and stone blend into a single muted field. Contrast fades further. Texture becomes uniform and soft. Nothing stands apart. The floor does not invite thought or interpretation. It offers no message or signal. Meaning does not gather here. Only presence remains. The stone floor with its settled ash remains quiet and unchanged. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains beneath everything else. Finished, grounded, and at rest. The single candle rests quietly on its shelf, unchanged and complete. Its presence feels settled within the space. The candle remains upright and still. Nothing about it suggests movement or change. A small flame rests at its top, steady and contained. The light it gives off remains soft and even. No flicker draws attention outward. The glow remains calm and constant. Wax holds its shape without dripping or shifting. The surface appears smooth and quiet. Nothing alters its form further. Everything has already settled. The light from the candle does not brighten the room. It simply marks presence within the darkness. Edges appear gently rather than sharply. Contrast remains low and contained. The flame does not demand attention. It exists without urgency or emphasis. Nothing about it calls for watching. The light remains safe to ignore. Shadows form softly around the shelf. They do not lengthen or shift. Their shape remains familiar and still. Nothing changes within them. The candle does not suggest time passing. It appears the same moment after moment. No visible change occurs along its surface. Time rests quietly around it. The light does not reach beyond the room. It fades gently before touching the walls. Nothing outside is revealed. The glow remains enclosed. The candle does not serve as a signal. It does not announce beginning or end. Meaning does not gather around it. It simply remains present. The shelf beneath the candle supports it evenly. Nothing tilts or leans. Balance feels complete and resolved. No adjustment is needed. Light touches nearby surfaces gently. Brightness softens before becoming distinct. No sharp outline appears. Everything remains muted and calm. The candle does not interrupt the room's stillness. It fits naturally into the surrounding quiet. Nothing about it draws focus forward. It allows the space to remain restful. Attention drifts toward the glow without settling on detail. No specific point holds awareness. The light reads as a general presence, uniform and calm. The flame's movement, if any, remains imperceptible. Nothing signals change or variation. The glow appears constant and reliable, steady without effort. The candle does not suggest warmth or comfort directly. It remains neutral in sensation. Temperature loses importance here. Only light remains. Edges around the candle soften further as awareness relaxes. Definition gives way to general glow. The candle becomes less an object and more a point of presence. Contained and quiet, the flame does not invite thought or interpretation. It offers no story or meaning. Attention does not cling to it. It allows awareness to drift freely. Light and shadow blend gently together. The boundary between them softens. Contrast fades without effort. Everything feels even and calm. The candle holds silence without effort. It neither produces nor resists sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around it. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The candle remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. Awareness begins to rest less on the candle itself. The glow no longer anchors attention. It becomes part of the room's overall stillness, included rather than separate. The light fades into the surrounding dimness gently. No edge remains distinct. Glow becomes ambient rather than focused. Nothing stands apart. The candle does not invite vigilance or watching. It remains safe to ignore completely. Awareness drifts without resistance. Rest feels natural here. The single candle remains where it is, settled and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains softly present, finished, steady, and at rest. The thick wooden door remains closed, settled, and complete. Its position does not suggest opening or movement. The door rests firmly within its frame. Nothing presses against it from either side. The wood appears dark and matte in the low light. Its surface absorbs light rather than reflecting it. No detail draws attention outward. The door remains quiet and still. The frame holds the door evenly on all sides. Edges align without gap or tension. Nothing shifts or loosens further. Everything feels resolved. The door does not indicate passage or transition now. It has finished its role for the day. Expectation no longer rests upon it. It exists beyond sequence or task. The surface of the door feels dense and reliable. Grain patterns remain visible without emphasis. No mark stands apart from another. Texture remains even and calm. The door does not allow light to pass through. Nothing enters from beyond it. Nothing leaves through it either. Separation remains complete. Sound does not pass through the door. No noise gathers near its surface. Silence remains even and contained. Nothing interrupts it. The door does not suggest time passing. It appears the same moment after moment. No change occurs along its surface. Time rests quietly against it. Attention drifts toward the door without settling on detail. No handle or feature draws focus. The surface reads as one quiet plane, uniform and calm. The boundary the door creates feels steady and reliable. It does not thin or weaken. Inside remains inside. Outside remains absent. The door does not suggest distance or destination. It flattens space gently. Beyond becomes only the idea of elsewhere. Nothing forms there. The door feels thick and sufficient in its place. It blocks passage without effort. Nothing presses inward from beyond. Containment remains intact. Edges soften as awareness relaxes. Definition gives way to general boundary. The door becomes less an object and more a limit, a quiet stopping point. The frame around the door holds steady. Wood and stone meet without tension. The junction remains unchanged. Everything stays in place. The door does not interrupt the room's balance. It completes the wall rather than opening it. Nothing draws awareness beyond it. Attention remains within the room. Light inside the kitchen remains low and even. The door absorbs rather than reflects it. Contrast continues to soften. Edges fade gently into shadow. The door does not invite thought or interpretation. It offers no scene or suggestion. Meaning does not gather here. Only enclosure remains. Awareness begins to rest less on the door itself. It no longer anchors attention. The boundary becomes part of the room's quiet mass, included rather than separate. The difference between wall and door softens. Both feel like continuous surface. Distinction fades without effort. Space feels contained and sufficient. The door holds silence without effort. It neither produces nor resists sound. Quiet remains evenly distributed around it. Nothing disrupts this balance. Time feels less structured here. Moments pass without distinction. The door remains unchanged through each one. Presence replaces sequence. The thick wooden door remains closed, settled, and complete. It holds no task, no motion, and no expectation. It simply remains as a quiet boundary. Finished, enclosed, and at rest. The room remains present without needing to be described in parts. Individual forms begin to lose their edges. What was once distinct now feels gently blended. Surfaces soften without changing position. Boundaries remain, but they feel less defined. Edges no longer call for attention. Shapes hold quietly without emphasis. Everything remains where it already is. Materials feel less separate from one another. Differences between textures begin to fade. Weight replaces detail in awareness. The space feels evenly held. The room no longer presents individual objects. It appears instead as a collection of surfaces. Those surfaces rest together without contrast. Nothing stands apart. Light no longer settles on specific places. It spreads gently and evenly. Brightness becomes ambient rather than directed. Shadows remain soft and contained. Hard lines begin to blur into one another. Corners feel rounded in perception. The space reads as continuous rather than segmented. Separation feels unnecessary. The sense of enclosure remains steady. Walls and boundaries still exist. They simply require less attention now. The room holds itself without effort. Surfaces appear less textured over time. Roughness and smoothness lose distinction. Touch becomes imagined rather than specific. Sensation remains neutral and balanced. The ground beneath feels present without detail. Support is understood without description. Nothing presses upward or downward. Everything feels evenly held. Vertical and horizontal lose emphasis. Orientation becomes less important. The space feels whole rather than arranged. Structure fades into presence. The sense of completion remains. Nothing suggests further action. Nothing feels unfinished. The moment holds without direction. Sound remains absent without being noticed. Silence feels evenly distributed. No area gathers noise or attention. Quiet remains uninterrupted. The room no longer asks to be understood. Meaning gently thins. Language begins to feel less precise. Presence replaces description. The sense of space becomes more internal than external. Distance feels shorter and less defined. Near and far lose contrast. Everything feels close enough. Light and shadow blend further. The difference between them softens. Brightness becomes a background quality. Nothing stands out. Forms no longer suggest purpose or function. They exist simply as presence. Recognition fades into familiarity. Attention no longer settles on specifics. The space feels steady and reliable. Nothing changes suddenly or unexpectedly. Everything remains consistent. The room continues without interruption. Edges soften further in awareness. Definition gives way to general shape. The environment feels more like a field than a place. Contained and calm. The sense of time loosens slightly. Moments feel less distinct. There is no before or after to track. Only ongoing presence remains. Awareness drifts without needing direction. Nothing pulls attention forward or back. The space holds attention gently. Without effort, the room no longer feels composed of parts. It reads as a single quiet volume. Mass replaces outline. Everything feels evenly distributed. Contrast continues to diminish. Differences become harder to notice. The environment feels smooth and undemanding. Nothing interrupts this state. Attention becomes broader and less focused. Specifics dissolve naturally. The space no longer needs naming. It simply continues. The room remains enclosed and stable. Boundaries feel present but gentle. Nothing presses against them. Containment feels complete. Light feels like a general condition rather than a source. Shadow feels equally diffuse. The difference between them becomes less meaningful. Everything rests within the same field. Awareness settles into the space without effort. No adjustment is needed. The environment holds steady. Nothing calls for attention. Forms continue to soften gradually. The sense of objecthood fades further. Presence becomes more abstract, yet still grounded and calm. The room remains quiet and complete. Nothing has been removed. Nothing has been added. Everything simply remains. The space feels even and steady. Nothing stands out within it. Awareness rests without needing to focus. Everything feels gently balanced. Light exists as a soft condition. It does not gather in one place. Brightness and dimness feel similar now. The difference between them fades. Surfaces feel present without detail. Texture is sensed without definition. Rough and smooth lose distinction. Everything feels simply there. The air feels still and unchanged. Nothing moves through it. It holds evenly across the space. There is no direction to notice. Sound remains absent without effort. Quiet feels evenly distributed. Nothing gathers noise. Silence continues on its own. The sense of distance shortens gently. Near and far feel less different. Everything feels within reach of awareness. Nothing feels separate. Edges feel softer than before. Boundaries remain, but do not assert themselves. Containment feels calm and reliable. Nothing presses outward. The ground of the space feels steady. Support is understood without thought. There is no sense of shift. Everything remains held. Time feels less noticeable here. Moments do not stand apart. There is no need to mark them. Presence replaces sequence. Awareness does not settle on anything specific. It remains wide and unfocused. Nothing asks to be examined. Attention rests easily. Light continues without source or direction. Shadow feels equally diffuse. Contrast fades further. Everything blends gently. The space feels smooth rather than shaped. Form matters less than presence. Structure dissolves into general feeling. Nothing interrupts this state. Temperature feels neutral and unremarkable. Warm and cool lose importance. Sensation becomes balanced. Nothing calls attention to the body. Quiet continues without being noticed. There is no beginning to it. There is no end to it. It simply remains. The space feels consistent throughout. No area feels different from another. Everything shares the same tone, uniform and calm. Awareness drifts gently without effort. Nothing pulls it forward or back. There is no direction to follow. Only continuation remains. Meaning grows thinner over time. Words feel less necessary. Understanding softens into sensation. Presence remains sufficient. The environment feels less external now. It feels more like a general field. Inside and outside lose contrast. Everything feels contained. Attention becomes quieter as it widens. Focus does not lock onto anything. Awareness rests without effort. Nothing resists it. Light continues as a low, even state. No highlight forms. No shadow deepens. Everything remains level. The sense of surface becomes vague. Touch is imagined without clarity. Contact feels distant and soft. Nothing presses back. Time continues to loosen. Moments blur together gently. There is no need to separate them. They pass as one. The space feels steady and dependable. Nothing changes abruptly. Everything continues as it is. No adjustment is required. Awareness becomes less verbal now. Language fades into background noise. Sensation remains without explanation. That is enough. Quiet remains neutral and uninterrupted. Nothing fills it. Nothing breaks it. Experience remains simple, undemanding and calm. The field feels steady. Nothing separates itself. Awareness rests without direction. There is no focus required. Light feels even. Dark feels similar. Difference no longer matters. Everything feels the same level. Sensation remains faint. Texture is barely noticed. Edges do not appear clearly. There is no need to find them. The space feels present. It does not ask to be understood. Awareness stays open. Nothing pulls it anywhere. Quiet remains. It does not deepen or thin. Silence feels unchanged. Nothing interrupts it. Time feels wide. Moments do not separate. There is no before. There is no after. Only continuation remains. Awareness does not settle. It also does not drift far. It simply remains present. Meaning feels thin. Words feel lighter. Language fades quietly. Nothing replaces it. field feels smooth. No shape stands apart. No boundary asserts itself. Containment is assumed. Awareness remains broad. Nothing narrows it. Nothing expands it either. Balance holds naturally. Light continues without source. Shadow continues the same way. Contrast feels irrelevant. Everything blends gently. Sensation feels distant. Touch is not distinct. Contact does not register clearly. Nothing presses back. Sound does not appear. It does not disappear either. Quiet simply remains present. There is no change within it. Awareness becomes lighter. It does not hold detail. It does not seek detail. Nothing is missing. The sense of place dissolves further. Location feels unimportant. Here and there feels similar. Everything feels close enough. Time feels less structured. Moments feel wide and flat. Nothing marks their passing. Continuation feels natural. Awareness rests easily. No effort is required. Nothing resists this state. Nothing supports it either. It simply continues. Meaning continues to thin. Understanding becomes optional. Sensation remains enough. Nothing needs explanation. The field feels even. No area feels different. No center appears. Everything feels evenly present. Awareness does not move. It also does not stop. It simply remains open. Light and dark lose distinction. Presence replaces contrast. Nothing stands forward. Nothing recedes. The sense of boundary fades gently. Containment remains without effort. There is no crossing. There is no edge to cross. Quiet remains neutral. It does not deepen. It does not lighten. It simply continues. Awareness becomes less verbal. Thought does not form clearly. Images do not hold shape. Nothing replaces them. The field remains smooth. No interruption appears. Nothing signals change. Nothing signals ending. Time feels open and flat. Moments blend quietly. There is no need to notice them. Continuation feels sufficient. Awareness remains lightly present. No focus is required. No adjustment is needed. The field continues as it is.